Unfortunately, the duo of Peterbot and Pollo split, coming into trios this year, and probably unsurprisingly, each one of their teams has won an FNCS. However, they are now contesting each other and fighting off spawn. So in this video, I'm going to compare these two teams across these 5 elements to see who is the better team. Starting off with our early game at Demon's Domain. Right off the bat in game 1, look at the difference in drops. All of Pollo's team have like pretty much god drops, in particular Acorn and Agers. Peterbot's drop is absolutely cooking. And then Cold and Ritual. What are these drops, boys? What are these drops? Now, this drop is a 50-50 drop spot, and the main area that they're all trying to land is on top of the main building. So there's obviously a few different pieces of loot you can get. This floor spawn here, which is wood, and then this chest and this floor spawn over here, which is a shotgun. And finally, obviously the god chest that also 100% spawns up here. Look at the difference. Pollo and Agers already much deeper in close to those floor spawns. Acorn is ahead of Peterbot going for the main chest, and Ritual and Cold haven't even landed yet. So the result of this is relatively obvious. Pollo gets straight onto the floor spawn, gets a shot off to Peterbot then whilst he's trying to open that chest, and as he drops down, manages to get the first knock. Then Cold, who ended up landing a layer below, ends up taking a 50-50 straight away with Acorn and winning. But because Agers is right next to him, he's able to finish that off, and now it is a 2v1. This then leaves Ritual, who's dropped further down, with a single SMG to win a 1v2, and of course, because all the teammates stay close to each other, he just gets absolutely wiped. Now, strangely, one of the most important parts of this drop is this little ledge. So if we take a look at the drops from game number 2, Pollo has a stinker. He's very high. And on the side inspection, it seems like Peterbot has the best drop. However, you can see that Peterbot's actually too low. Now, this ledge is important because look at the drop from Acorn. Because he has the absolutely perfect drop, he can slide, grab this weapon, and then double shot Peterbot, wiping him out. But because you can see Peterbot's drop is too low, he has to slide and jump over the ledge, meaning by the time he gets the weapon, Acorn's already able to wipe him out. Now, one of the things I find very interesting is despite the fact that Pollo had by far the worst drop, he almost was able to use this to his advantage. You can see as he approaches this small opening here, rather than landing and jumping in, he slides down the stairs here and is almost the first player to grab a weapon down here. Unfortunately, his drop was a little bit too high, so Ritual was able to get the weapon first, but he does a good job of mantling out and managing to keep himself alive. One of the really interesting things he does from here is he actually prioritizes damage over healing himself. You'll notice he's 34 HP and he grabs a big from this chest. And as he's popping it, he notices that Cold drops down next to him here. So he cancels the big and then ends up spraying Cold for around 90 damage here. Since Cold doesn't know where he is, dealing this damage makes a lot of sense because he has the opportunity to turn this into a 3v1. And that's exactly what he does. Cold is weakened and then eventually gets knocked here, leaving Ritual as a solo who is not able to 3v1 clutch this. Now, game 3 is really interesting because, as you notice, there are no floor weapon spawns that land up here. So that means that both teams end up 50-50ing for the 2 chests that are here. Now, unsurprisingly, Pollo's team has much better drops again. As you can see, they've all landed in the window, and Peterbot's team also haven't touched the ground yet. Now, the 50-50 here is really interesting because Acorn, Agers, and Cold all go for one chest, and then Pollo, Peterbot, and Ritual go for this chest. So each chest has a 2v1 on it, but it's Acorn who carries this. Notice how he goes slightly to the left of the chest to try and block Cold, and then looks up as Agers is opening the chest, allowing him to get the gun first. Funnily enough, out of the 3 players 50-50ing this chest, each one of them got a single item, but Acorn was the one that managed to get the weapon. Now, what he does from here is sprints to the side, shoots, and then builds himself up a layer to try and protect himself from all the other players up here, which is super clutch. Then his recognition of who was able to get the gun from the other chest is really important, because as you notice, Ritual was the one who managed to win the opposite 50-50, so each team has one single gun. Then, rather than fighting Cold or Peterbot, Acorn does a great job of shooting Ritual, who's the one who has the weapon. As you notice, there's actually a moment where Cold runs past Acorn and he does not shoot him and instead keeps his eyes onto Ritual, who again has the weapon. This then allows him to wipe out Ritual and then Cold right after that. Funnily enough, if these guys were wearing the same skin, he wouldn't actually be able to do this. So the fact that Peterbot's team all have different skins on here probably actually didn't help them at all. I'd like to note that the play that Peterbot makes here is also hilarious as they run down for this chest to 50-50 it, but he isn't able to get any of the weapons, just the mat. So he sprints, jumps, blocks Pollo, and then as Agers is running, pieces him in, sprints, and then resets, locking him behind and manages to grab the loot from this chest. This then allows him to get the kill onto Agers to start with. However, of course, Pollo manages him to get him in the piece and finish him off. Now, one of the most impressive things about Pollo's team is the fact that they have strategies for different bus paths. Now, it looks like Ager's drop's really bad, but he actually whips around the side and grabs this chest, landing way before any other player. Now, if Peterbot's team had better drops, they could have slid onto this and 50-50'd, but because Ager's drop was slightly further forward than everyone else's, this meant that he was able to grab this chest way before anyone else. And then, yeah, the fight's just pretty much immediately over from there. Ager's also does this in game number 6 on a similar bus path. However, there's not actually a chest that spawns, so he sprints over to the god chest that spawns there. As he's approaching though, notice how he looks up similar to one of the previous matches we saw, and he's actually able to grab the gold pump first. Then he basically just wipes out all 3 of them. Now, game 5 was the one game that Peterbot's team managed to win off spawn, and what do we see here? Yes, very unsurprisingly, the one game they won off spawn was the one game they had better drops too. You can really see how that negatively impacts. Say Acorn, for example, had to hurdle over the edge there, which obviously was one of the things that didn't have to do in one of the earlier games, and then is immediately wiped out. Pollo does a good attempt trying to get some damage off, but also ends up going down, leaving Agers as a solo who eventually just jumps off. So unsurprisingly, Pollo's team off spawn was way better. They had better drops, they had better strategies, so they're obviously getting the point for this. Next up, let's look at the strategies that each team has, starting with Pollo's team. Now, one of the very interesting things you'll notice they're doing off spawn is that Pollo is not immediately killing the boss. You'll see all of these shards that are around here also drop a lot of loot. In particular, they drop big pots and assault rifle ammo. So rather than just instantly killing the boss, they spend a bunch of time knocking out these shards and gaining as much ammo and big pots as possible before later on all then killing the boss. Now, another reason this is so good is because every single time you destroy one of these, if you notice on the right there, actually gained 15 superhero points. So by actually allowing these to respawn over and over again, they also are able to get themselves higher in the superhero rank. I've already covered this in a lot of pieces of content, but if you don't know, if you use the mist gauntlets on the Dago boss, it's the best way to kill him because you can hit all of the shields and him at the same time. This superhero rank is actually very valuable because if you notice next, they will go to the bunker. And now because they are A rank, they're able to open this up and grab another mist form from here. Since they're here, they can farm a little bit more metal, but strangely, Acorn and Agers intentionally get knocked by the storm. This is actually because you get more superhero points for being revived, so this helps them get closer up to the S rank. They then buy one of the med mists from the wall to heal themselves up, then hit the rift onto this campfire to get themselves safely into the next circle. Getting themselves up to the S rank was also super important because later on, Acorn opens an S chest, which allows him to get a mist form, giving all 3 of them either the mist form or the ascended mist. Now, you may notice something strange. He ends up dropping 6 big pots here. This is because obviously he wants to carry the mist form, but it's also incredibly important for him to continue to carry the dash blob. And that's because of their great partial rotates. You notice how in the 5th zone, they ended up building up on a nice little ramp here to a high elevation so they can grab some more storm surge tags. And when the 6th zone pulls, it's to their east. This means that the teams on their west are going to rotate towards them, so they end up staying here for a moment to farm these teams for surge. Then, when the zone opens up enough, they use the dashes and their mist forms to push themselves into the dead side of the zone. Now, you'll also notice there's no one behind them, and that's because all of the teams that would have rotated here were the teams that they ended up spraying away earlier. However, because they've been playing the Storm and then the Dead Side, this means that they've actually kept themselves away from a lot of other players, which means they end up dropping below the Storm Surge thresholds. So when they pull a completely max distance 8th zone that pulls over this massive hill, they make a great call to use the Mist Forms to fly up right on top of the hill to give them vision onto all of the players down below. From here, they're easily able to get above the Storm Surge threshold and then Mist Form off yet again because you can't be shot while in the Wraith form. Now, of course, this isn't the strategy that they use every single game. In another game, the zone pulled down to the south, and in these zones, there's a high likelihood that the island is going to spawn very close to their drop spot. And in this game, it does. As soon as it appears in the 2nd zone, they commit a ton of the mobility that they have to get there as fast as possible. Because there's really only one way to get up there, which is using the rifts, the first team to get up there has a massive advantage because any second team that comes to try and land on them will end up getting sprayed out of the sky and has a high likelihood of dying. So since they were able to get up here so early, they're then able to not only get the extra medallion from here, but then use this island for Storm Surge. Because the zone is pulling south, that means all of the teams kind of rotate towards where they are, allowing them to rack up a ton of damage. Whilst Pollo and Aegis are up on the island getting the damage, Acorn gets sent down below to refarm, grab extra loot, and even pushes into the storm to grab tags from angles that his teammates wouldn't be able to see. Importantly, he is carrying the Ascended Mist in case he gets into a sticky situation and he needs to get out of there. So let's contrast this to what Peterbot's team is doing. Now, you'll notice the difference here with Peterbot's team, and that's that they don't sit and farm these spikes. Instead, they just wait until they've grabbed a certain amount of loot and then just kill him instantly. So they actually lose out on some hero rank here, but also a lot of the ammo as well. However, the superhero rank didn't matter that much, as they were still able to get to A by killing the boss, killing all of the NPCs around, and then obviously winning off spawn against Pollo. This means that Peterbot can then go into the same bunker that Pollo's team went into, however, much earlier into the game. And similar to Pollo's team, he was also able to get a mist form here. But this is where their gameplay takes a completely different turn. Rather than playing the storm and spending some time here using med mists and getting superhero rank by reviving each other, Peterbot hits the rift and starts scouting for teams to fight. As he was flying in, he saw this brick box end up being built, so Peterbot is suspicious that there's a team hiding in this building. But what's really important here is actually the roles that each member plays in this fight. So Cold ends up standing on one side, and notice the angles that he takes. He's sitting hiding behind a peanut butter peak, behind a ramp edit, just spraying in, trying to apply as much pressure as humanly possible. Then once he moves out from the side here, he's still just sitting on a right hand peak on a wall, just trying to apply that pressure, spraying over and over again. He's not overcommitting, he's not getting really close into the box, he's just taking safe peaks and trying to do some damage and apply that pressure. Then as Cold does this, Peterbot applies pressure from the complete opposite side, completely pinching the team in the middle. This then causes one of the players to box out towards him, giving the first knock of the fight. Then, whilst Peterbot and Cold are pinching from the sides, Ritual is playing the tops. Notice how he's just staying way up above all of the other players, and he again is also not overcommitting and jumping straight into the box by any means, and he's just making sure that none of the other players crank out and get height over Cold and Peterbot while they're pressuring. Then, once they have that first knock already, and now it's a 3v2, that's when all of the players start to collapse in and manage to get the second elimination. Unfortunately, the third player does manage to escape and run away using the dashes and the mist form, but this was a beautifully executed fight. The next fight they get themselves into is the Brazilian team of King, Phaser, and PhZine, who've moved up to NA, and this is probably their first taste of getting entirely W-keyed by a Peterbot team. Here, the way they play this fight is very similar to the previous fight that we just watched. This fight initially starts by them cranking up, and they're easily able to take height because the Brazilian team just boxes up. Now, if you zoom out and look at this fight, this is one of the worst situations that teams can be in, because King's team has about 1 million boxes, and you as the aggressor some way have to work your way through all of that. So the way that they end up setting this up is that Peterbot drops down to the layer that they're all on and creates 2 boxes here. This may use a lot of materials, but he's safely able to keep his distance away from the other team. Then, from a completely different angle, Cold is doing the exact same thing that he was doing in the previous fight and just taking very safe peaks, just continually pressuring the other team. For Ritual, this time he's not playing on the tops because they're on the top of a hill in the middle of the map, and if anyone cranked up on height in this, they'd easily get third-partied. So he's just staying on a right-hand peak and repeatedly spraying over and over and over again, draining the other team's mats and racking up chip damage. So as you have all 3 of these players continually applying pressure, they're essentially just waiting for the other team to make a mistake, which of course happens. Ritual cracks PhZine, which then allows Peterbot to make a play and get the first knock. So up until this point, Peterbot's team has played this extremely safely, but now that they have the numbers advantage, that's when they start to collapse in and make slightly riskier plays. Then with the numbers advantage, they're easily able to finish the fight. One of the reasons I think that this fighting style works really well is because you've got Ritual and Cold who are setting up Peterbot and putting him into positions where he's able to make a play. So really, as long as they don't make a massive mistake and die, it's just a matter of time before Peterbot inevitably will get a knock, and from then on the fights are pretty easy. Of course, this isn't a rule by any means. Later on you'll see Cold get the first knock onto Reet, but generally it seems like the rule of thumb is to play relatively slowly until they get a knock, and then they just collapse in. Now in this tournament, this was the only game that they made it off spawn, so of course they were going for a high elimination game and there weren't many mid-game strategies. So I looked into the previous week's tournament to see what their game plan looked like when they weren't just on the back foot. At the time where Pollo's team tanked the storm to get the rift to then go into the edge of the zone, instead, Peterbot's team went dead center of the third zone and boxed up onto a massive hill in a surge base. To me, this makes a little bit more sense because they have the medallion that repeatedly recharges their shield, so from this position, Peterbot can just sit and trade surge with as many teams all the way around them, which led to them not dropping below the surge like Pollo's team did. So despite the fact that a lot of the strategies look relatively similar because they are coming from the same drop spot, Pollo's team looks like they have a much better grasp on the meta, so they're absolutely getting the strategies point. But unsurprisingly, Peterbot's team is obviously going to get a point for fragging and fighting because their fighting style is just so incredibly good. Let's go on to the next section, which is how they play the end game. Now, Pollo's team is clearly a team who has played a ton of scrims and really understands this meta. Since all 3 of them have a mist item where they can turn into the Wraith form, all 3 of them use this at the start of the first moving zone. But when Acorn lands, he doesn't just build a tarp or a box or 2, he creates a 2x2. This means that your full trio isn't in 1 or 2 boxes, but instead you're more spread out across 4. This is very meta specific because it's pretty much just a complete counter to the mist gauntlets, which we'll see later on. Whilst in here, you'll also notice that Acorn has 1 cone edited and a ramp up against the walls. This is because this side is where the majority of players are towards the lobby. So if anyone anyone does try to mistform straight into their box, they're going to have more layers to break through first. After pre-editing a team to get a refresh, you'll notice that yet again they use the mistforms to fly all the way down to the front low side and again create another 2x2. This time, however, Agers spots another team on low ground creating a 2x2 in full wood, and since all three of them are carrying the Ascended Mist, they basically wipe this full trio in a matter of seconds. Now on this next rotate, you'll notice that Acorn gets back to the front side, unsurprisingly, yet again, but this time it's a little bit of a scuffed layer with tons of teams all around them. So he actually tanks the zone ahead of him for around 3 or 4 tiles to create a full tarp for Agers and Pollo to get in. Then, with a relatively flat final moving zone, Acorn drops down onto the low ground and just creates as many cones as possible to cover as much space as possible. Now, this again is a good counter to the Mist Gauntlets, as your team can be more spread out, but also it blocks any team from dropping down, and if they do want to drop down, they have to tank some Storm in order to do that. Plus, you have all the edit control on players dropping down above you. Now, they didn't manage to win this game, but they did manage to win 3 other ones, and in one I looked at in particular was the complete opposite of this, as it was a fully height game. Now, the way they took height this game was very interesting because it was all due to the early scouting. As you can see in this zone, the 8th zone pulls completely towards the dead side and up a mountain. However, because Acorn was scouting this and had planned it beforehand, he could get his team into the position to take height very early, and they were basically able just to maintain it for the rest of the game and win from there. It's clear that their game plan revolves around very smart IGLing by Acorn to put Pollo and Agers into positions so that they can pop off and frag well. Their game plan is essentially very well executed and very textbook, so let's see how different Peterbot's endgame is to that. Now, Peterbot's team does a lot of the same similar strategies that Pollo's team does, however, their composition is a little bit different. Because Peterbot is, well, Peterbot, the team essentially plays completely around him in a similar way to Pollo's team plays around Acorn. However, Peterbot and Acorn are 2 very different players. Peterbot puts them in positions to often go for frags and high eliminations in the endgame, which is often much more risky. They thrive on layers that often aren't as optimal, where Pollo's team often goes down to low and tries to take the most optimal layer. Often Peterbot's team is not on the best layer possible, where there's a lot of other players, but because Peterbot's team is so good at fragging out, being on these layers is almost an advantage because they can drop a high amount of elims. The issue with this is that they often trade a ton of damage and often need to spend a lot of time healing and get put into even worse positions, which can snowball into one of them dying. And actually, out of the 12 games that they've played across the last 2 Divisional Cup finals, they've only made 3 end games. However, in these end games, they've placed 3rd, 4th, and 4th. But on the flip side, they've dropped 14, 17, and 19 eliminations respectively. So in all 3 of the end games they got to, they may not have won any of these, but in each of those individual matches, they were the team who scored the highest points. So when it comes to the endgame playstyle, as much as I love Peterbot's highly frag-dependent, solo clutch reliant playstyle, I've got to give it to Pollo's team. Every single endgame they make it to was either a 2nd or a 1st, and it's not like they weren't fragging out like Peterbot's team was. One of their matches was still an 18 elim win. In terms of the overall playstyle, there's a bit of a difference between the two. Pollo's team is clearly playing to have a lot of consistent, perfect matches, a perfect game plan overall, whereas Peterbot's team doesn't mind losing a few games off spawn, but every game they get off spawn they're making count with a high amount of really risky elims. Despite the fact that the game plan for Pollo's team was incredibly good, they did struggle with Surge a good few times, whereas Peterbot's team just fragged through everyone. It just seems like if Peterbot's team gets off spawn, they're going to have a massive game. So if they put a bit more practice into their drops and actually winning that 3v3, then this leaderboard could have been completely turned around. That does mean, of course, that we are giving it to Pollo's team. They are currently looking way better practiced. But if you want to learn about how Peterbot beat the allegations, you can click on this video right here. Let me know what you think.